without the National Guard, and with a white population that had been sort of urged on by the governor of the state, a mob now gathered outside the high school. 8 of the students got there together that morning. One of them had missed the meetup, and she would arrive all by herself later. 8 of the students got there together, stepped out of this little van, and there's this crowd of angry people, and the police making some effort to keep them from being murdered. The police actually hustled the 8 black students into Central High. They had made it. They were inside the school. But there's no education going on because all the students, the white students, are outside with the protesters. So they get them inside the school, and then the police were afraid that the mob was going to storm the school. They actually succeeded. They sort of hustled the students down through the school, out through a back entrance, into some waiting police cars, and out through the mob. And so it's just chaos. And this is the young woman who had missed the meetup spot, showed up by herself, and as TV cameras film, there's this sea of hatred around her. And it looked like she was going to be attacked until, from the crowd of angry white people, this tall, blonde woman stepped out of the crowd, put her arm around, Elizabeth Eckford was the young woman's name, and this blonde woman put her arm around her. The crowd sort of reacted in stunned disbelief. What's she doing? And she put her arm around Elizabeth Eckford and helped walk her to safety. And given the way things looked, may have, saved Elizabeth Eckford from a beating or perhaps even her life. Here, the mob is attacking a reporter, for reporting on them looking like savage idiots. Eisenhower was now not just embarrassed, but furious. Think about it. Here's the governor of a state stopping a local school board from complying with the Supreme Court of the United States. This makes the president and the country look like sort of a joke. And the president now brought the hammer down. He federalized the Arkansas National Guard. That means the governor doesn't get to give orders to the National Guard anymore. President Eisenhower does. This is actually it's a legitimate power in the Constitution, but it has almost never happened in the country's history. To federalize a state's National Guard and take them over is like slapping that governor in the face. And then, Eisenhower sent 1,100 men from the 101st Airborne. Federal troops. The 101st Airborne, the same unit who we talked about pinned down in the Battle of the Bulge back in World War II. So here their job is to get 9 black students into a high school. And damn it, here come the troops. Federal Army trucks. And all of this to get 9 students into a high school. And what this showed many black people is that the federal government would act if you could force them to act. If you could pressure them, embarrass them, well, then they would take action and do what they probably should have been doing all along. So here is the enforcement of the law in Little Rock. Look at this poor little white guy with his feelings hurt. We thought we were on this same team. So they got in with armed escorts. They got in, and the school year got underway. Now, Eisenhower left some of those soldiers there for the entire 1957-58 school year. every one of the 9 students had a military escort to school each day and back to their house when the school day was over. In fact, they even had a military escort inside the school. But not in the classroom, or the restrooms, or the lunchroom, just in the hallways, going from class to class. So they were still vulnerable in the classrooms, in the locker rooms, in the cafeteria. They were picked on by, well, the people who do the actual picking is certainly a minority of the white students. But almost no white students tried to stop it. There were a few white students who engaged in acts of kindness, often when no other white people were looking, but they were disappointingly rare. They persevered, and 8 of the students made it through the school year. One of them was a senior and graduated. First black graduate ever from Central High School. But one of them didn't make it through the school year. It was one of the young women who had been repeatedly harassed by this group of white girls who had picked on her and put gum in her hair and thumbtacks in her seats, knocked her lunch tray out of her hands. And are any of them ever punished? I'll let you answer that at home. So one day, in the lunchroom, she had had enough of this. And they came around and did some cruel act to her once again. And this time, she picked up a bowl of chili and dumped it on one of the white girls' heads. And she was immediately expelled. And of course, the white girls continued on with their school year. And after she was expelled, these cards, white students at the school were passing these around. 1 down, 8 to go. But 8 of them made it through the year. And at the end of that year, Governor Faubus decided to close the Little Rock schools completely for the next school year. A tactic of massive resistance we talked about before. He closed all the public schools rather than have a second year of integration. And he thought that that would save him from being out-racisted and ousted as governor. But in a nice little postscript to this story, it didn't work. He was out-racisted anyway, and lost in the next election. Eisenhower had enforced the law in Little Rock. Notice he didn't do it right away, but he did it. He then met with civil rights leaders in 1957 and 58. There's King, there's A. Philip Randolph on the other side. And black people were now sort of leaning back towards the Republican Party. Remember, they had leaned away towards the Democrats with FDR and Truman. But now, a Republican, Eisenhower, had, yeah, you could say reluctantly, you could say at the last minute, but he had enforced the law. So let's look at the South, sort of panning out from Little Rock, right there. And around this map, all the counties you see in blue are counties that had started integrating by 1958. All the counties that aren't blue, not a single student had been integrated. And the states that are yellow, well, in those states, not a single student in a single county anywhere in the state had been integrated. So what does all deliberate speed seem to mean to Alabama or Virginia? It means never. Bit, bit. It means go to hell. They have no intention of complying with the Supreme Court. Ever. So in the 4 years since the Brown decision, you could say that we have cracked open the door leading to integration. But really, it's just around the edges of the South, the border South. That's where there's some effort to comply with the law. But But in those places that were complying with the law, that were starting to integrate, they found that as schools integrated, white people moved away from the now integrating school. They moved to the suburbs. The suburbs were growing quickly in the 50s, fueled by new interstates. And the suburbs could legally be kept all white. And so black people move into schools that are now legally segregated, but white people move away. And that school becomes a high majority black population. Of course, schools are, the population of that school is determined by the people who live around it. So if the white people move away and can keep the suburbs legally all white, which they could right now, they could get away from integration. This phenomenon became known as white flight. White people actually fleeing the integrating public schools. While these events were going on and sort of capturing your television screen, more quietly, down in Monroe, North Carolina, a veteran named Robert Williams was sort of organizing an insurgency inside the NAACP. Williams was a former Marine, and right after he got back from the Marines, there was an incident in his hometown of Monroe, which is really a nasty, violent, white supremacist-dominated town. There was this incident where another veteran had been murdered by white people, and they were so angry at him that they wanted to get his body from a black funeral home and destroy it. So to protect a fellow veteran's corpse, Williams organized a group of black men with guns, and they went and stood outside of the funeral home as the Klan approached. And when the Klan saw, 12 to 20 black men with guns outside the funeral home, those Klansmen just kept riding. And Robert Williams realized most of these white supremacists don't want to fight. They want to beat up on people who are scared of them. In 1956, he took over the leadership of Monroe's NAACP branch. And he made it different than any NAACP branch in the country. He recruited former veterans like himself, working class people, tough guys, and they armed themselves. Williams taught them how to shoot. They accumulated guns. And then they tried to carry out the same kind of non-violent protests that black people were elsewhere. They organized protests to integrate the swimming pool in Monroe, to integrate the library. And they did this with non-violent protest, but with the white people around them knowing that if attacked, they would fight back. At one point, while they're protesting the swimming pool's exclusion of black people, not even segregation really, just exclusion, Williams is run off the road by a group of white people who then approach his car with baseball bats. And Williams pulls out a pistol. You want this? Is this the way you want to go? And the police showed up and made the white people back away. The police didn't want to deal with a shootout, and so they enforced the law. In 1958, a white community unsettled by Williams's growing NAACP branch indicted 2 young black boys for attempted rape. These 2 young boys were, I think, ages 8 and 10. And one of them was kissed by a white girl, same age. the young boy, his mom used to work in the white girl's parents' house, if you followed that. So sometimes the kids had seen each other when they were little, sort of before school, played with each other. And she saw him, recognized him, was so excited, her playmate from when she was younger, and kissed him on the cheek. She then went home, she told her mother, oh, you know, I saw so-and-so, and I was so excited, we played, I kissed him on the cheek. And her mother freaks out, calls the police. And the police then took these two young black kids out of their homes and arrested them for attempted rape. Williams now raised hell. He succeeded in getting the story of what became called the kissing case into the British press. And it plays into what many black people were trying to do, which is, you know, shame the U.S. around the world. And as the kissing case became an embarrassment for the U.S., Eisenhower put pressure on the governor of North Carolina, who got the boys released. And so, as we leave Robert Williams here in 1959, we're not done with him at all. We'll come back to him at the beginning of the next lecture. So if you're writing about Robert Williams as a key term, make sure you include what we've just done here, and then the part of Robert Williams that we'll get to in the next lecture as well.